Welcome to episode 34 of the Critical Fools podcast. This week we'll be discussing a film titled A Son, directed by Mong-Hong. It's a Taiwanese film that came out in 2019. Uh, One of the interesting things about this film and why I picked it was because it kind of gives us a little bit of an insight to a different culture, as well as some cross-cutting themes that I think anybody can relate to. One of the high level themes. Right, I'm gonna ask what your thoughts are, Alexis. But one thing I wanted to highlight was this film was, it's in many ways maybe not a masterpiece, but I found it very profound in some of the subject matter that it touched upon around like growing up in I think Taiwan, parent-son relationships, and that dynamic, which I think as more of Westerners we would find a bit more bit different. But I'm curious what your initial thoughts on watching the whole film. I know it was a bit of a long one, but I'm curious. Like, it was a bit of a different one too that we haven't kind of done before.
Yeah, I thought this film was really interesting. I think this is probably the first Taiwanese film I've ever seen. But I guess one of the big takeaways that I got from this film is sort of the cultural expectations that are placed on kids and how they internalized it within the family unit in Taiwan. And it was interesting because the plot wasn't overly complicated, right? It was kind of slice of life. You have one son that's viewed as sort of the golden child, and another that's sort of he makes a lot of mistakes in life and ends up going to jail. But how the family treats each son is very different. And for the son that is the golden child, everyone assumes like everything's good. He all has everything together, when in reality that's not the case, as you see in the film. And with the son that went to jail, so the two kids' names are Ho and Hao. So Ho is the one that goes to jail. Hao is the one that goes to college. For Ho, you see him at the beginning; he goes to jail, but you see it's kind of like a redemption story for him in a way, or that's at least how I viewed it. So it was really interesting to see them overcome certain challenges as well in the film. But yeah, I thought it was good overall, and it gave a lot of cultural insight into like Taiwanese culture.
Yeah, building off on the point about like the pressures of society. I thought what was interesting about this film is that often, I think in American culture we also have a lot of movies that deal with like that teenage to adult transition. But if you think about it, it's often in the perspective of obviously the main characters, which is like the teenagers. What I found interesting about this particular film was that we also saw the struggle on the other side, parenthood, right? Like how sometimes as a parent, you don't, and I think I'm not a parent, but
Yeah,
I guess
neither of us are.
if you're a parent, I imagine that like even though you have maybe you might, even if you try to suppress it, like you have a bias of what you want your kids to be, or how you want them to behave, or what you want them to do even. And I think when kids are growing up from that teenage to adult phase, I think sometimes you have to realize that it's out of your control. And that's actually one of the subtle themes I see in this film is that like the parents in the end, in their own way, which we can discuss that later, do love their kids and have to also self-reflect of why did their kids end up the way they did, right? And maybe not everything they did was perfect, right? Because dialing it back, right? In the beginning of the movie, right, we see that Ho, that was actually a strong opening, I felt, like the whole slicing of the hand.
Whew. Yeah,
Yeah, I
apparently
was not expecting
that
that.
was inspired by a story someone told the director back in like the '60s that actually happened.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm not surprised. And slice the hand, and obviously we'll get back to that, that
That
whole jail
moment.
experience, like, and that reconciliation. But it started off with like a abrupt start, which I thought was like, whoa. And then what's interesting is that the movie kind of mellows out a bit, and gets into deeper of the characters and the family dynamic. But one son, like you said, is, you could argue, is acting out because he feels aimless. And instead of and you see this a lot with the father son's dynamic, right? So with the older with one of the sons, right, he feels that like, okay, he messed up, he's dead to me, right? Like in the beginning, it's really emphasized, right? Like the mom asks him like, why do you only talk as if you only have one son? He's like, I only have one son.
Right.
He blemished my name. I'm not even, to me, he's dead already. The other son, like you said, is like the golden child, right? Which I think this is an archetype I know I've seen even growing up, of like this kid can do no wrong. What a character, great grades. Looks like he's going to be up and coming. But I think what we see later, like, actually it's not even like that far in, right? It's like, I would say middle, about halfway through, right? How, How, I think I'm pronouncing it right.
Mm-hmm.
He commits suicide, right? And it was kind of hinted at, his, I guess the person who had a crush on him, what's her name, Shen?
Hey, by the way, your audio is coming in a little choppy, just FYI.
Oh, that's interesting. I wonder why. How about now?
It's good right now, but just keep that in mind. But go ahead.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have the same side of it. It might just be. Let me move the mic closer to my face. It might be one of those things where what was I saying? Yeah, so obviously bit of backdrop is that like the one of the subplots is that the brother that commits suicide, he has like I would say like a flirtation.
I would say a love interest.
Love interest. I mean, it doesn't get anywhere beyond like
friendship,
friendship, but you could see the hints that like she wanted something more, but he's I think that was my first hint that like I think there's a lot going on in his brain, because he doesn't really just he's nice, but he doesn't really like beyond like enjoying her company, doesn't go beyond it, and then soon after commit suicide. But I think she reveals to the mother, I believe, that like he was feeling a lot of like the pressures of like being in such a high esteem, right? Where he feels he cannot like make any wrong, right? Like he can't, that he has nowhere to, backdrop to. What's the right word? Like, you know what I mean? Like basically what I'm describe is that like he's an individual who feels like he's under the microscope, kind of like how we view our maybe star celebrities and athletes. And he has nowhere to kind of like be a normal person, right? Because when you're young, especially, right, you make mistakes, right? You have growing up experiences, And I think, unfortunately, his character reflects, maybe the darker aspect of, I'm going to just specifically say Taiwanese culture, where maybe the pressures to be perfect, be, perfect in every sense, right? Like not just in school, but in athletics, but also like emotionally perfect, right? Like you have no problems, you're a good behavior, you're an exemplary citizen. That's something that I also found interesting, right? Like here in the States, we don't often talk about some of the language they use, even though it's translated, was interesting. Or like it was like a good person is like a good citizen.
Yeah,
it was very. I found that insightful too. But yeah, I'd like to get your thoughts on like the brother that did commit like suicide and what you thought about that.
Yeah, well, I think I spoke about it earlier, but there was a big contrast between the two brothers, right? Where they were in their lives, right? Ho was viewed as sort of the screw up, right? He went to jail. He was in with the wrong crowd. He got this girl pregnant, right? It was totally contrasted story from his brother, who was in college and was trying to get into medical school, right? And so he had all of those pressures. And this is not the first film we've done from Asia. This is the first Taiwanese film specifically. But you can see that I think there's a lot of time, especially for males in Asia, and I could be culturally ignorant, but it's hard for them to express outlets or like if they have any anxieties there, right? From what I know of Japan, it's a very sort of emotionally repressed culture. And I would gather to believe that Taiwan is similar in some respects to that, where it's probably not okay to talk about, if you're struggling, mental health. I think he just had all that burden that he needed to be perfect, to excel, right? To sort of live up to the family name that his father wanted, where his brother wasn't going to live up to that, right? And in the end, it just, right, because it was even very hard for him to open up, period. Even to his specific love interest. So I think all of that just became a burden, or just way too much on him, and he ultimately chose to end himself.
Here's my follow-up question. Did you see that coming?
I could see some. I didn't know if he was gonna. I knew he was troubled, and the reason is he always seems so distracted. I mean, I don't know if you remember the scene where he was in the classroom and he was just staring off into the abyss, basically. And the professor's like, "Oh, is my class too boring, or are you too good enough?" Blah blah. And then he just gets mad, disrespectful, and he tells him and kicks him out of his class, right? And so that was like, huh. Like something's not quite right there to just be staring. Like they chose to include that scene for a reason, basically. As far otherwise, it makes no sense.
So what's interesting is that the death I was caught off guard because even though I thought something was off with him,
I thought he was depressed.
I thought something was off.
That.
But when the classmate reached out to him, that's usually like in many ways could be a small like pull back to I'm gonna say the light,
the real world, or yeah, yeah, I get what you're saying.
A small tug, and that sometimes is the difference. Not doesn't again like no onus on the other character to play savior, but sometimes that's enough. And
sometimes it's not.
But yeah, sometimes it's not, which was in this case. And I think the scene was done actually very like
oh yeah, when
powerfully.
He just leaves.
Yeah, it just leaves, and then like you just see he just jumped off. I was like, wow,
it's brutal, bro.
And one thing I know, I'm not, like I said, I'm gonna do a disclaimer here that I'm not an expert. I'm not even Taiwanese, but what I have read about cultures in Asia, well, Southeast Asia, is that the suicide rates are pretty high because of probably some issues that this director is trying to tackle.
Yeah, you can't really talk about anything you're struggling with, I would imagine, especially in Japan because the suicide rate is very high there.
Yeah, I've specifically done reading on Japan and South Korea, but I'm assuming Taiwan, and I should do more reading on this, is probably in a similar vein to a degree. I'm
sure China has its own issues with it too.
Yeah,
I don't know if they report the full figures.
Well, we should always trust. We should. Okay, you're baiting me on this, but anyways, yeah. I trust government facts. So
sure.
What I will say is that I think I think it is. There's partly some truth to it. I will say on air here, no names, but I will say that I know of family members that have tried to commit suicide, and I will say that I think you're right.
It's just go ahead.
I think you're right in the sense that I think when people tend to bottle things up and not discuss things that are bothering them, like in their own personal lives, but also understanding like why things are the way they are, you lash out. And it's always like, like you said, like when you anything in life, right? If you build it up, then it explodes, right?
Yeah. What I will say about with a lot of old world cultures, they tend to not, you tend to put on this face of like not really showing emotion, and you couple that with a lot of these old world cultures don't like to deal with sort of mental health issues, right? At least I could speak from the Mexican side. They pushed back on that for many decades, right? Even recently up to here, mental health wasn't really discussed a whole lot. Back in the 60s, it was very taboo to go to a therapist, for example. But I feel like in many ways, and the reason I bring that up is that you can tell from, at least I could sort of pick up from how that he was a little like socially awkward. Like he was very aware from like he could think deeply on certain things, but he seemed very awkward in like quite a few interactions. And I don't know if he had some anxiety or even some mental health issues that just weren't discussed.
Yeah, it's not like elaborated too deeply in the movie. But yeah, it's what I liked about this movie too.
The one thing I would add is I would imagine that Taiwan doesn't really deal with mental health issues like to a great degree as other countries necessarily. And no one really does it super well, but as well as certain countries do.
Yeah, what's interesting is that what I liked about this film was that the characters are complex. So even this brother who does commit suicide, he still it's never like black and white, right? He cares enough for his other brother to, one of the things I found very profound was like when he finds out that his other brother is going to be a father, he tries to actually connect, Yu, I think her name is Yu.
Yeah, Yu.
To his brother because he's in jail. Well, I do want to talk about the jail thing, but and what I mean by my whole point with this little point is that like, suicide is not often done in films, and usually when it is done, it's because the person has like cancer or whatever. Like there's some kind of reason. This was a very multifaceted character, though. He didn't speak much, like you said. He was a bit awkward. what I found interesting was that he was still somebody who was still trying to engage with like peers, his classmate. He was also trying to engage with his brother who was in jail. But in the end, like you said, like it just something snapped and like it just terminated for him.
You couldn't take it.
And it speaks to how like abrupt it could be, and like how sudden it could like just flash, right? Even if everything seems kind of normal-ish, right? That's why I'll give some kudos to this film. Not many films will have that kind of nuance. They'll, like I said, I've noticed in general when it comes to like suicide, unless it's really about suicide, there's always some kind of core reason. Oh, I'm terminally ill, or right. I've lost all my family members. Like on the whole, from the outside looking in, I think, again, I'm not Taiwanese, but I imagine the reason this probably maybe struck a chord in Taiwan is that on the surface, right, he looks like he should be an upstanding citizen and happy. Because he's being showered with praise, he's succeeding. What's the problem, right? I think that's a lot of people, especially from the old school mentality you were saying, would be like, what's your deal?
Yeah, I agree.
But moving on to the prison stuff, what did you think of that dynamic? That was like interesting to see a correctional facility in Taiwan and kind of like how some things in societies don't change across the continents.
Yes and no. What I was kind of struck with was the laxness with which they treat their prisoners compared to how
it was juvenile, by the way. So,
that's true. Was it?
Yeah, he was under 18 when he was.
So even with juvie here, I would imagine that we're far more strict than they were in their juvenile prison system is in Taiwan. At least that's what I gathered, because they weren't. Now I don't know the significance of the clothing, if that's viewed as if that's traditional wear, if there's any stigma with that. But I mean, within here, like you're gonna be placed with an orange jumpsuit. You're usually like stripped naked. Like it's pretty brutal. I've never been a juvie, but it's pretty brutal from what I've heard. Right? It's more. I feel like a lot of our. I guess it's gonna be kind of controversial. I feel like a lot more of the way they check people in, at least with the American prison system, is much more dehumanizing than what was portrayed in the film in Taiwan.
Yeah, I could agree with that. Like I haven't been inside a juvie. I've seen juvenile hall outside. Like I used to live not far from one, and I've never been inside. I've heard things, and you read the news, but sure. I will say that what I meant by what's similar is that dynamic, right, of like
power structure.
You have to power structure.
Oh yeah,
you have to
that's
out
universal.
Where you fit, and like you have to play tough and stuff. And what's interesting is that like he actually, you could argue that he needed that. Like he.
What I also did find interesting though, and I know they have class, but they had like formal classes for the prisoners there.
Oh yeah,
and I don't know if. I could be very ignorant on our prison system, but from what I gather, that's not like what goes on within the U.S. prison system. It's like formalized classes to try to keep up their skills. Now, I know they have classes and GED programs and stuff like that, but this was far more structured than anything that I've ever heard of from like our prison system.
Yeah, and there's also scenes where the family comes inside. And actually even the person he's Yui even gets to go inside. So yeah, there were some, and actually
there's some stark differences.
Yes, I would agree. But also, what did you think of that when Yui got to come inside and they basically had so taking a backtrack a little bit. So Yui does go to the prison, and I think they actually get married when he's in the prison. Right? Going back a little bit, what did you think of the whole interaction of when Yui's mother knocks on Hao's mom's Quinn's door? That whole interaction of like I got my daughter's knocked up, and now this is your responsibility.
Where's Hope? Where's Hope? Well, he's in prison.
Yeah.
Oh, shoot. And then reality starts to set in.
Yeah.
It was interesting that the stepmother gave up the daughter basically to be raised by that family. I don't know how many families would necessarily make that move.
Yeah,
that's a tough situation.
It's a very interesting dynamic, and like I said, I'm gonna withhold my opinions because I assume that there could be some cultural things there too as well. I just don't know enough. but I found that whole interaction very interesting as well as part of the movie storyline of like,
Sure.
I expected the mother's reaction to be severe, right? Because her kid is like not pregnant, but yeah, like suddenly like a disassociation. That's another thing I found really intriguing in the film is how they're able to do the quick dissociation. I understand that some parents, even in America and other cultures, like can do that, but twice we see examples of this early, right? Her, and then even with the dad and Ho who goes to prison, right? Like, oh, I don't have a son, like that quick, like it was like not even a mourning period of like, oh, it took me 6 months. It was like, nope, the next day I'm like, I don't have a son, dude. I was like, that's definitely a difference.
That's part of the culture, dude.
Yeah, it's definitely a difference how you're able to just kind of cut the umbilical cord like instantaneously. That's like a level of emotional, I don't want to say the word control, but let's just say,
I don't even know if it's control. It's repression as far as I can tell.
Perhaps, but I don't know. It's hard to describe because,
dude, come on. I mean, people are people no matter what culture, but society expects you to be strong in Vietnam or in not Vietnam. Sorry, in Taiwan.
Or any culture really, but
yeah. Well, especially in like the more traditional like Asian like cultures, and so like you're just expected to move on, right? And showing any sort of vulnerability is not really encouraged by society. So I would argue it's more repression than anything else, based on society's expectations.
Yeah, it's probably repression. It's probably a mix of repression and then just like what
I would liken it to is because we're American, right? Like I said earlier about mental health, it was super taboo in the 60s, 70s. You could look at Mad Men's portrayal of therapy as like, oh, shoot, you don't want to be viewed as a crazy person, right? And little by little, we've improved on society. But like at that point, it's not like people didn't have mental problems. It's that they repressed them or like even talking about them because no one wanted to really deal with them. The same thing with this. Right, most people, when you lose a son, that's a brutal, especially the suicide. That's a brutal event.
Yeah, it's, I remember when I watched the film, and I took like 3 sittings to watch it because it is a bit slow at times. What I found kind of like interesting was like you're saying, like it's probably a mix of repression, but also something that I recently finished one of Malcolm Gladwell's books, Outliers. And part of that book, he talks about like cultural heritage and how that can like be a detriment, but also a kind of like a privilege, like to have some good cultural heritage. Also, I think it's been passed down, like you said, like not just how people view therapy, but like you said, how they control their emotions. Because when you're a kid, right, you look at your parents as like barometers of like what's the mental framework, and your parents have probably looked at their parents, right? So even though there's always tweaks. Like like genetics, right? There's always little variations and tweaks. This has been probably passed down multiple generations. So by the time you're growing up, you've also formed your own mental framework initially, at least, by what you saw with your folks and other relatives. So I imagine that like if we got another movie about like Ho's dad, I bet his dad was in many ways similar to how he's doing things. Like it's like you kind of mimic what you kind of like grew up with and understood, right? And I think that we talk about a lot this with like shows we discuss, like The Wire and stuff. But like sometimes like changing those cycles is actually harder. Like it's probably one of the hardest things you can do in your life actually, because those patterns of behavior are reciprocated through your family lineage in some ways. Yeah. So yeah, this movie, it's interesting that we're really focusing on the mental health aspect, which I think is one of the points of this film.
Look, a lot of it was about, I don't even know if mental health, but more like emotional repression or how you're supposed to be stoic in certain areas. What the idea of expectations and how that can be overburdening at times for especially the youth as well as the parents.
Yeah.
Right? And that was one of my big takeaways from the movie. I don't know if you got anything else really from it.
I got that as well. I think for me, the movie.
So like one of the things I saw was like expectations, at least, right? So you have expectations that society places on you, your parents place on you, and you place on yourself, right? The one big thing that I noticed, which was really interesting, and it was a shift once Hao committed suicide, was that Ho's expectations that he placed on himself changed. Oh shoot, I need to get my stuff together, right? Like he married you. he got a job. He was trying to be clean, right? He was trying to be a good citizen, right? He worked 2 jobs when he got out of jail, right? Try to keep his nose clean. His his mentality really shifted, like once his brother passed. I thought that was one interesting point that they for the character development in the film of Hope.
Yeah, his character, you're right, is super fascinating, almost like heroic, because not just as a redemption arc, but it clicks in his brain.
It's a redemption arc.
Right? It's his brain clicks, like you said, that like he will never, like, he sort of like in many ways accepts that maybe his father will never accept him, right? He like, by accepting those like potential realities, he's able to move on.
It is brutal when he got home from prison and his dad's just there. That was awkward.
That was a powerful scene, though.
Oh, that was so.
His dad didn't even flinch, you know.
Nope.
I've seen that in live too. But anyways,
yeah.
But it's one of those. It's one of those things. I know we do got to talk about one of the other main characters, but what's his name? Radish. But before we get into there, real quick, I think I had another thing I wanted to bring up, which I got derailed a little bit. But yeah, I think we could talk about Radish. He was very intriguing, at times infuriating, but he almost represent like the darker nature of like.
Yeah, he was a psychotic kind of character, right? He was I would say sadistic, is how.
Yeah, very sadistic, and he was basically a bully too, right? Like he was
a bully. He was part of whatever criminal organization they had there. I don't know if Taiwan, if they have sort of the same organized crime structure or like group as mainland China of the triads, but he was part of whatever like the main organized crime entity is in Taiwan. Like you could tell he's in the criminal underworld.
Yeah, he almost had like a parallel, like he was on a parallel trajectory. I think that's why his character is incorporated and probably in there, because he doesn't deviate from where he started, right? Still like. He also faces punishment too, right? And actually, that's the other thing too. So sorry to rewind, right? So they both go to prison, right? Ho and Radish.
Oh yeah.
And early in the movie, there's that scene, right, where I think it's Radish's father asks for money. Remember that whole dynamic? I
don't know. No. Was it Radish's father? Or was it the victim's father?
The victim's father. One of them. It might have been the victim's father. The victim's father asked for money, and
because Radish's family was nowhere to be found, right?
Yeah, disappeared. Yeah, very quickly. So I know I want to get into Radish, but one thing I found interesting is that there's a lot of scenes where it's focused on the dad's workplace as a car instructor. Even a funny scene with the
I was about
the let's just say sewage. That was nasty. But there's actually a lot of scenes revolving around his workplace. I'm kind of intrigued what your thoughts on why did the director choose to do that, and what do you think it added to the story?
So it was just interesting, right? Because he was his whole character to me was just sort of your traditional dude of like, he always kept his nose clean, right? So pretty old school in terms of like, the kids should respect me, and he worked sort of what I would consider like more a blue collar job, right? He was a driving instructor for all his career, and yet he had these high expectations for Ho or How to sort of transcend the lower class, lower middle class, whatever you would place in there, into like getting into that next class and to do well and become a citizen. And he gave up on Ho early on because he was on a completely different path and made different choices, right? And as far as him being a driving instructor, I don't know exactly what the director was going to there. I thought, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so only thing I could stipulate, because I now we've done a lot of movies. Unless the movie is like bad, I usually lean on the side that the director was intentional.
I'm sure he was. I just couldn't figure out why.
It's to me, what I focused on was the profession. So if you're a driving instructor, you have to have a level of patience, but also the same. So you have to have a level of patience in the sense that you have to be able to deal with a lot of
but people learning a new skill for the first time.
but it's also a skill where there is a right and wrong way, right? It's binary, right? There's a right way to drive, there's a wrong way to drive. And so I thought the profession probably, because you could have picked anything, right?
He was binary in his outlook from anything.
Exactly. So I viewed the profession as a reflection of the character, because the director could have picked like anything, right? He could have made him a janitor, could have made him an office worker, but he chose driving instructor. And I think it's because there is a wrong way to drive and a right way to drive. And like you said, I think he viewed things very black and white. I think we see this transition until he gets to the gray.
There's rules on how to act. Right.
Exactly. And I think even though, like you said, it was a more blue collar-ish job and probably not the highest pay, I think he found comfort in that kind of like, I follow the rules, you can pass. If you don't follow the rules, you fail. Like, you know, and I think in life, even beyond Taiwanese culture, I think I've met a lot of people who, you know, they view life that way, where like, it's like, if I do this, this, and this, I should be rewarded, right? If I do, I mean, I always use the cliche, right? Like if I go, I'll be happy and I'll get married and all this stuff, when those things maybe could help you in your life, but they don't necessarily equate to like fulfillment, right? And I think, you know, we see this even with people like as they get older, right? Like you said, the midlife crisis. But it's I was just asking because I just wonder if you had any thoughts, because something that popped in my brain when I was thinking about the movie was like, you know, the profession here, because we spent actually a decent amount of time at his workplace, had to have meant something for the director and the story. So jumping from him to the mother, what do you think of the mother's character? Her dynamic.
So the mother contrasts, and it was interesting seeing her character because she was obviously like more empathetic. She was more motherly, right, in terms of her outlook. But in many ways, she was sort of she was very strong in the family unit too, because she kept everything together when the dad didn't really want to deal with things, specifically with Ho. In his situation, she took Yi-wen when they were having issues, and the husband was living at his workplace for a while. She like took some of the money, invested it, opened up her own like hair salon, if you will. So she was there and kept the family going even when the dad kind of retreated. So she was a pretty strong character.
Yeah, I found that like you could tell early in the movie the dynamic was the traditional, you know, male calls the shots. It shifted
a little bit.
It shifted when she felt like she needed to assert herself, because I think what she started focusing on was like, you know, maybe my marriage isn't perfect anymore, but like my son still has a chance. So because remember she opens that hair salon so that you can actually maybe have a career and like feel some self-confidence and self-worth, even though her husband is like, who cares really? Like this is, I'm not going to cuss on this, but I don't give a rat's. But anyways, I just want to touch on the parents before we really focus on Radish. We touched upon him earlier. His character doesn't deviate from his path and is involved in sketchy things. And he is a bully. He even intimidates the family to a degree. Even like insults not insults, but like when they have the rooftop scene with the dad, that was also a really good scene where like the dad's trying to see how he can get this guy out of their lives through money or whatever. And
Radish, yeah.
Yeah, and he twists on him saying like, "Oh, now you want to give me money, and where was this money before, et cetera, et cetera." It was like he had a deep understanding of like what buttons to push. And then when he shows up to the car, like to Ho's job at the car wash,
it's interesting that father and son both have professions that deal with cars.
Yeah, also deal with precision, right? There's a right way to clean a car, right?
Oh yeah, it's always the right way.
Yeah. So that's that's why, like, to me, I wanted to highlight the profession thing, because I was like, "That's not a way. That's an accident."
Yeah, I just thought about that.
Yeah. There's no way that's an accident. The hairstyle one, I think I don't know if that was as well thought out, but for sure the father-son thing, I was just like, it's not just cars, but I was like, there's also like, there's a right way to do it, right? And there's a wrong way to do it. It's not ambiguity. Yeah. And you see that like Radish is like somebody who is like basically like, and we discuss, this term is overused a lot, but like, a toxic individual that like,
clearly he was a psychopath.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to get revenge, and he knew that he could force Ho to do whatever he wanted, and he chose, like, he relished that, really.
Yeah, he wants Ho to commit crimes and get his hands dirty and et cetera, et cetera. And we'll get to the other really powerful scene in the movie later. But we see through the movie that Ho actually goes to, like you said, he tries to do amends, right? He goes to the victim. he talks to him and like tries to apologize. It's a bit awkward, right? But I thought what was interesting is when the guy's like, I know you want to ask me like, what does it feel like? And he gave him like a real answer, saying like, it's like,
oh yeah,
he's like threw his arms like, I don't have a hand, but just imagine feeling like you do have a hand. I was just like,
he gave a different example. I forgot exactly what it was, but I remember being like, whoa.
Yeah, he gave like a good example for so he could relate to it.
Yeah.
But basically he was trying to convey that like his hand is cut, but sometimes he feels like his hand is there.
Yeah.
But I was just like, I can't remember what the example was. It was really good. But you could tell that like, even though they both have to move on, it's like, it's one of those things. It's like a painful, probably like, I would describe it like a painful, maybe like divorce.
It was kind of like
loss.
A forgive but never forget, right? Because it was a constant reminder.
Exactly. Like you can't it's like a scar. That's a good one. It's a good analogy. It's like a scar, right? It healed, but it's still there. And
you
like
still have the mark.
It's never going to be fully healed because you can't fully heal those damages, That's a physical way, but I think it's also
you can't fully grow back a hand.
Yeah, it's also an analogy, I think, to also emotional wounds, right? That we think they just heal, but sometimes those scars never heal, right? They don't fully heal. They can heal, but like it's like a scar.
Well, yeah, it's like you hear that with people who've had like a damaged friendship or whatever, because they'll say something that you just can't take back. And although someone may forgive them, it's like, oh, well, yeah, you cut deep with something.
Exactly. No, it's exactly. Yeah, it's. Yeah, some things are better left unsaid, as they say, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. You got to choose your words carefully sometimes. But the other thing I want to ask is, what did you think? Because this was brought up a lot about. This was used often by the dad of seizing your day and deciding your path. What do you think? What do you think the dad meant by that, and why was that so important to him?
Oof, that's a good one. I haven't thought about that too deeply, but he did say that a lot.
A lot.
I think there's an intention that probably the director was stipulating, but I think the character himself, I think what he wanted his because I think this does come from. I'm going to make a comment, about Asian cultures, because I think there's an old Chinese proverb that's like no man goes hungry if he rises before. I'm paraphrasing it, so apologies. No man goes hungry if they rise before dawn 360 days of the year. I think it's a quote. To me, how I interpret it, even throughout the movie, was like he was still trying to push like his kind of like philosophy.
If you work hard, you will succeed.
Yeah, kind of like you get up, you do your job to the best of your ability, and you keep at it. Because I think the dad, even though he was imperfect, I think he lived by that proverb that I just kind of paraphrased. That like
but the mom questioned that, if you recall, at the end.
She did, yeah. She questioned a lot. The dad goes through a really interesting character arc himself, because what he ends up doing. But in
a way, I will say he did live by his words, and that's what made that scene so powerful when he had his confession, because in the end, he chose his path of doing what was best for his son, who he finally came to acknowledge was his son.
Yeah.
Right. He made the choice. He said he seized the day, right, and decided the path that was best for his son, which was eliminating Radish.
Yeah. And what's interesting also is I was going to say
he knew his son, his wife would never have peace of mind until that threat was eliminated.
Yeah, and that phrase was really important to the dad, because I remember,
and as brutal as it was, even how chose to decide his own path, right? Everyone does, but it ended poorly.
Yeah, but that saying was really important to the dad, because I know that towards at the end of the movie, they find those notebooks, right?
Yeah,
and each of those notebooks is titled with basically that, right? Basically, here's a notebook for basically every day, and this is the the line, right? It's it's one of those things that's up into interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can kind of take it for, like I said, for a bit more face value here, because it's a very specific line. But yeah, like you said, it's like, I guess maybe what the dad realized late is that maybe everybody's path is different. and like he shouldn't be so judgmental about it. I think he hit that him later in the movie, but I think his core belief that like you make decisions, you don't kind of hesitate, and you rise up, like you work hard every day, you try to be a good, at least in his mind, right, a good citizen, a good father every day is like the goal of life.
So I guess my other question is, why do they choose the title of son?
Hold up, I can hear you fidgeting on the cup, dude.
Oh, sorry. Why do you? Thank you, because I didn't realize that. Why did you think they chose the title of son for this movie?
It's a play on words, right? A son.
That's true, but like even deeper.
That's the way. That's the way. That
even deeper. Why?
I guess that's as far as I went. But what is there a reason why you picked the sun? Because the sun rises every day, or
it wasn't just that, right? So like, it's like anything in this movie, right? It was a lot of metaphor. Which you're right.
That's why I like these movies.
There's a play on words, right? A son and a son, but really, I forgot exactly the scene. But when Hao was at the zoo with his love interest, right? He goes on the story about a son. And I forgot more or less what it was, but it was sort of trying to give more deeper meaning. Really, what you see is that to this family who was trying to rise up from their current economic situation, right? You see this all the time, sort of the people trying to rise up from a class perspective, right? And I think what you see this a lot with the way the son sort of goes and like it is shown in specific scenes that the sun was supposed to represent hope. In sort of a metaphorical terms when the sun was shining, right? And so tragically, their hope was sort of shattered through Hao when he decided to commit suicide, right? That hope was shattered, and there was a lot of tragedy in life. And it was, as suicide does, it tends to leave a hole and like why and a lot of frustration, right? I'm sure you remember the scene even when Ho was in prison and he's like going with a wheelbarrow and they're chasing him around because he's just frustrated, right? Because he no longer has a brother. And I think by the end of the film, you sort of see that there is hope within their son Ho when they had sort of wrote him off because you could see sort of the transformation, how he was trying to become like a good citizen, be a good husband. Things like that. So you see that, it's kind of like life, right? You see ups and downs, and when there's one tragedy or hope, there tends to be like some other opportunity for optimism in other areas. That's kind of what I got from it.
That's actually pretty profound. So yeah, I mean, I viewed it as word on some things I miss. I only viewed it as like a play on words. I really like to focus on like the.
Well, I mean, you see it, right? It's a redemption story, and in the end, what does the dad say? He's like, I used to not admit that when a woman asked me, right, how many sons, I used to say one, and he's like, I still say that to this day, but not. He's like, but my meaning for saying that has shifted, and that's because I only have one son, and now it's Ho. And so you could see the mentality shift. It's like, oh, and he's only said that because he could sort of see his work ethic, how he's trying to get his stuff together, how he's really changed in himself, right? And so I think the dad respected that, the expectations that his son has placed on himself, he's like, I can kind of respect. And I want to help him to sort of improve on that.
Yeah, so that actually leads, I know we've been jumping around, but there's a couple major scenes I wanted to discuss, which is, one is when the dad makes the decision to basically kill Radish, and then obviously when him and his wife have that conversation at the I'm gonna just call him the park or whatever, the outer area.
The hike.
The hike, yeah. But when that was revealed, when he was there and the whole time like following Ho and Radish, and then
it was wild. Yeah.
Dude, that scene was wild. I was like, he just kicked the accelerator. First of all, on a technical level, I thought the scene was well done. And then even though that didn't even kill him, he had to like finish the deal. But yeah, what did you think of the whole sequence? How it was edited in, the dad pulling the
it was
never expected.
It was a big shock, right? I mean, it was meant to be that way, but it just went to show the lengths that when you love someone and someone threatens your family, the lengths that someone will go. That's kind of what I got. And at the end of the day, he decided to do what he felt was the only choice and what was best for his son. That's as far as I took from it, and it was a brutal decision, but he took it, and the wife was shocked. But in the end, I think she kind of realized that was the best decision for her son and his situation too, because Radish was never going to leave him alone.
Yeah, never.
Never. Right, and so that was the only thing that the dad saw, and he's like, when he wouldn't take the money, that's when he realized what he had to do to protect his son, his hope.
Yeah, to me, I think that sequence, how it was kind of revealed and edited, was great because we follow Ho. He gives them the
and he comes back and Radish is
gone. You don't know, and you're thinking like honestly, my first thought was like, oh, Radish is just being an a-hole,
jerk like he usually is.
And then like he gets picked up even because they think like because he's left with the I think the money, right?
Yeah. Well, he hides the money because he doesn't know what to do with it, and then those gangsters come beat him up, and they're like, "You didn't spend any. Why?" And he's like, honestly, it was more money than I ever knew what to do. And he's like, I knew Radish might come looking for it. And then they reveal Radish is dead. Yeah. And you're like, huh? And then it all clicks and it all starts to come together.
It gets revealed, yeah. And I was just like, dang. I was like, that was well done.
It was.
Not spending the money saved his life, too.
Sure. And then they end up giving him money.
Yeah, they're like, "Oh, take it," because they probably didn't like that guy either, dude. It looks like nobody liked that guy.
No one liked Radish.
It was just through intimidation and stuff. But I guess Radish is a big mistake if you're a villain. Is that he like typical villains,
he pushed boundaries too much.
He underestimated, I think.
Oh yeah, the lengths that if you push someone, how they will counteract.
Exactly. They say that's when people are the most dangerous in the corner. So.
Well, it's like what is it? The most dangerous animal is like an injured one, right?
Yeah.
So you threaten one, and they're going to act a little different than if they're not threatened.
Yeah. I think, but I know we've been jumping around, but I think it's okay for this movie because it's a thematic film, more than just like a sequential story. Is there any other scenes that you wanted to discuss that we looked over, or you want to get into final thoughts / ratings?
Not really. I mean, it was very thematic. It was a linear sort of structure, right? But it's not like there were some events that were kind of slow and subtle, but it was kind of like for the buildup, I guess. And so I think this is way more about sort of themes. I mean, the whole title of the movie is just like a metaphor, and it's a play on words, right? A son, etc. So I'm there's nothing else that really sticks out to me, so I'm ready to get into final thoughts if you are.
Before I get into final thoughts, the one thing I will say too is I thought, I don't watch a lot of Taiwanese films. I thought the cinematography of Taipei was pretty interesting.
That was great.
One thing I think I'll do eventually another Taiwanese film, because the one thing when it came up for me when I was reading and researching about this film is that if you watch films from the 90s, early 2000s, and you watch this one, you actually see how maybe, like Taiwan, like any other country in society, has evolved and changed, and you can pick that up a little bit. I just don't watch enough of this specific film industry, but obviously you can speak to American films and be, oh, that's made in the 60s and it looks completely different than the 80s. But I know we try to have a broad brush here in our pod, so I'll figure something out. But
we'll incorporate that probably later in future episodes.
Final thoughts, yeah.
Mm-hmm. You want to go first, or do you want me to?
I can go first. This movie, I'll get into ratings after, but this movie, it was slow. I didn't know where it was going initially, but I connected with this movie a little more than I thought I would. Given my own background, given probably my own relationship with my own father, but other things obviously were totally foreign to me. Like, I don't know anybody that went to juvie or cut a hand, or I don't know anybody that actually, died of suicide, knock on wood. Even though I'm aware of how you can get there. But yeah, like I after this movie,
you actually know somebody who knows somebody who did.
Yeah, like that's true. But but I'm in like my own like
close circle. Yeah, I got it.
Let's say if I'm a node, like one node away, one separation, one degree of separation. So yeah, in that sense, it was profound. I left this movie actually having an appreciation and yearning to actually something that I wasn't even considering before, which is actually visiting Taiwan. and hopefully, you know, let's just say before things maybe change. And you know, yeah, like it's funny. Like before this movie, it wasn't even on my list and like a list of places to go. Unlike maybe other countries like Japan, etc. But now I'm very intrigued to visit and
to visit Taipei.
Yeah, and see this society for myself. So
Yeah.
I'll leave it there. I'll let you do final thoughts, and then we get into the final ratings.
Yeah. So this movie. This has been a sort of like a series of movies that we've done that have really touched upon different Asian cultures. I thought it was interesting getting more of sort of a cultural perspective of Taiwan, and I'm curious. We might do like a mainland China film. I'm curious to see if there are any cultural differences that we pick up with a similar type of movie between Taiwan and mainland China. And it was interesting. I guess my biggest issue with this film was just the pace. It was very long. I think some scenes could have been cut out or condensed. I thought the cinematography was great and some of the character development was really good. But yeah, to me, I just found it to be too long. At times I was like, all right, this is a little boring. Where's this going? There was not a lot of direction at times. And I get it was sort of supposed to be just like sort of in a way, kind of like a slice of life of this family. But it could have been stronger, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, haven't watched enough Taiwanese films, but I wonder if, like, in general, they like.
So I'll give you like another like comparison. Like Burning was slow, but it kept me engaged the whole time. This movie didn't always keep me engaged.
Yeah, but with Burning, I mean, that was just like I can't describe it.
Well, but it was another was another
Korean.
even I would say even Shoplifters. I was more engaged than this film.
Shoplifters was good too.
Yeah.
If there's a trend, everybody, I'm the one that's picked all these Asian gems.
Well, you picked this one too, though.
Yeah, I know. That's what I mean. Like, I pick all these Asian gems. But okay, yeah, continue.
That's because you have like two directors that you just go through like the catalog of. But yeah, anyway, so that was my biggest critique from this film. If we're gonna go into final ratings, yeah, I think it's also probably a product that we've seen a lot of films with this kind of pacing, looking at sort of cultural aspects of Asia. And that might bias my opinion a little bit because we've been doing a lot of them recently. But to me, I would give this film an 8 out of 10.
Oh, interesting. I also gave it an 8 out of 10. I thought the pacing at times, I agree with the pacing a lot. I thought that's why I actually I stopped and watched it 3 times, right? Like that's one of my barometers for am I really clicking with the pace? And like you said, it could be a slow movie, but enthralling, like you noted. Mm-hmm. I thought, the pacing was the main thing. I thought also, I thought the family was the core and they did great. Mm-hmm. But I know we were just looking at the cast and there's some names I'm like, I'm not an expert in Asian names.
I don't remember.
Yeah, it's like maybe to shorten it, they couldn't tighten up the cast because there's some scenes that they're just random with some, just seems like
very random. It wasn't
like what I'm trying to say is like there's some scenes with like you could argue could have been done with another main cast member versus like my coworker, so that's my main critique, and I think like 8 out of 10 for me is really solid. So yeah, I agree that like it's not that like upper tier for me, but it's also not. It's a movie that I left away with a lot of thoughts and a lot of appreciation for.
Mm-hmm. Well, cool. Well, yeah, I think that's about it for this film, and we'll leave it at that.
You're gonna do the like and subscribe, man. We're so rusty.
Yeah, I can do that. I didn't know if you wanted to do it, but yeah, I can. Anyway, I think so. So for our final thoughts on this film, yeah, it was a good film. Would recommend, and yeah. Chris and I both gave it an 8 out of 10. So if you enjoyed our commentary on this film, as well as the greater social commentary in general, just please like and subscribe to our channel. And we haven't said this before, but if you have any movies you would like us to review, we will definitely get to them. So please recommend some films down in the comment section. And stay tuned till next week.
I have one thing to add. I will say also, if we do get to... we only have 5 subscribers right now, but if we get to 100,
those 5, go ahead, give us some suggestions.
No, but if we get to 100, we'll even do a Q&A session.
Well, are we gonna do like a YouTube live?
No. we answer these questions and then we
All right.
control our responses. If we do YouTube, we'll do a YouTube live. We ever get to like 50,000,
1,000.
and then we'll see what our fans really think. But if we get to like that first milestone, we could do like a short Q&A. Do like 10
Dude,
questions.
if we get to 100, it'd be wild.
100
people care about what we say. That would be nuts.
I'll just add that tidbit just to give some motivation. But
well, cool. Anyway, stay tuned till next week. Until then.